Good morning, good morning. How is everybody? Welcome to the Summer of Magic 2019. It looks like we have some people starting to come in. Hello, hello. Let me know if you would, if you can hear and see me okay. Is the sound good? Is the video good? I'm going to be leading us in today. We're going to have 5 whole days of workshops this week. Hi, Mariah. Good to days. We have 12 presentations. Our theme for this year is honoring the old gods. So if you are watching this replay on YouTube, come on over to my group on Facebook, The Profitable Psychic. There's always a link down below in the description box, and you can participate and you can start to come to some of these workshops. All right, so I'm just going to pull up comments. Give me just a moment, wait for everybody to kind of come in. How was your full moon celebrations? What did you guys do? Anything fun? Anything interesting? I did a lot of cleaning. I always do my full moon cleaning ritual. Always, always. And I also did a lot of self-care and did a lot of self-care. Okay, someone's saying the stream might be frozen. Let me double check on my end. Okay, it's working on my end, Mariah, so maybe try to refresh. Hi, Jennifer. Good morning. Jennifer, could you let me know if the sound in the video is okay? Hi, Pamela. Good morning. Good morning. I want to make sure that sound and video is okay before we get started. Okay, thank you so much. Thank you, Jennifer. All right. So who here already has a relationship with Persephone or has worked with Persephone or has done the year and a day goddess initiation through a Wiccan degree, some type of Wiccan ministry? How many of you have worked with Persephone or kind of know a little bit about Persephone? I'm just trying to gauge like where you guys are at with it. Hey, Jessica, good to see you. Good morning, Susie. Good morning. Thank you. Thank you for the sound check. I know it's kind of a slow start this morning. It's a little early in the morning. It's a little early for me personally. I have been working with Persephone. She is one of the first goddesses that really ever came to me. When I first started getting into tarot cards, the first deck that I ever got was the Mythic Tarot, which is based on Greek mythology, and I don't recommend that as a beginner deck because it's really kind of difficult and overwhelming. But the one of the coolest things about that deck and the book that came with it is I really got to learn about Greek mythology. And I was probably maybe 13 or so when I got that deck, and I started really connecting with Persephone. It really was like, part of it was like my rebellious teenager self was like really into Persephone. She ran off with the bad guy, with the bad boy. It's really relatable in a lot of ways to teenagers. But then also when I started on my Wiccan ministry, I was Wiccan, I'm not anymore, but I was for a very, very long time. I started on my ministry degree. I was probably early 20s. I was maybe like 22, 23, quite some time ago, maybe like a little bit less than a decade ago. And all of you who have been through the goddess initiation rites, most traditions teach Persephone. And that's when I really started working with her on like not just like thinking of her as some sort of idol or icon or something like that. But when I started working with Persephone, as in like cultivating a personal connection with her, and I set up I have a Persephone altar, I have a dried pomegranate and things like that. And she's usually my go-to girl. She's usually my go-to. She's always had a really intense place in my heart. And I really hope that today, that if you don't know much about Persephone, or you don't, if you know a little bit about the story of Persephone, my goal today is to get you to see a different side of Persephone. She can be kind of an intimidating goddess, and a lot of people are kind of like, they don't know if they really want to work with her, or maybe she's a little scary. She's not as scary as Hecate or anything like that, but she's a little bit intimidating. And the story itself of Persephone and how she became the goddess of the underworld is a little bit intimidating as well. And so my goal today is to kind of help us rewrite, especially as women, or female identifying people, or people who are maybe male but are connected with their divine feminine, and to help us rewrite the story of Persephone, see her in a little bit of a different light. And I think by the end of this workshop, I think you're going to really see her in a different way. That's my goal, at least. Hey, Jen, good to see you. Susie says, we called her in when I initiated my second degree. Yeah. And I actually went through the whole thing where they, you dress up and you go through the underground, which is just a veil, and it's on the other side, then you're initiated. It's a really cool process to kind of go through. Okay, Jennifer is a little bit familiar with the mythology. Pamela says she's not worked with Persephone at all. Hi, Marissa. Good morning. Jessica says I've not worked with her, but I work with Hecate, so I'm excited to learn more. Okay, cool. Yeah. Hi, Paula. Good morning. Marissa says I was acquainted with her through the Mythic Tarot also, plus goddesses in every woman. Yeah. Hi, Mario. Good to see you. Hi, Angela. Hi, Wendy. Good to see you. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit first. It's going to be this workshop's going to be broken down into a couple parts. So the very first part of it is I'm going to tell you a little bit of the traditional story of Persephone, of Kore, really. She became Persephone, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that, and the traditional story. And then I'm going to tell you what my story is, or what the story that, there's another story. There's another hidden story of Persephone. There's another point of view of Persephone. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about our light side, our dark side, and balancing it, and, all of the beneficial, holistic healing things that can kind of come from that. And stay to the end, because if you can, or come back and watch the replay, because I have a question for you towards the end, and I'm going to be giving away 3 of my workshops. There's 3 workshops to 3 different people. I have several to choose from. I have the astrology of tarot, the numerology of tarot, give the most epic tarot readings for love and relationships, give the most epic tarot readings for Halloween, which is going to be getting a huge update here pretty soon, and also give the most epic tarot readings for chakra healing. So you have those 5 to choose from. And so I will be picking a winner for today's winnings on Friday when I talk about Odin. Okay, so you have all week, and there's going to be a question at the end. You'll just answer the question into the box here, and then I'll pick 3 people. Hi, Lynn. Good to see you. Good to see you. Okay, so we have to kind of go back to the beginning of time to really understand who Kore is. We're going to be referring to her as Kore from now on until I get to the part where she becomes Persephone. So we have to kind of go back to the beginning of time. So in the beginning of time, the Earth, it's a kind of a cosmology story, and Kore really explains like the seasons and what happened with the Earth's tilt and things like that. So in the very beginning, the Earth was not on a tilt. It was just right side up, and there was no seasons. It was just perpetually the same weather in the same area all the time. And that's kind of like where the Christian mythos kind of got this whole thing where, it was the Garden of Eden, it was paradise. And I'm trying to put it into terms like modern terms and ancient terms so you can understand like how these kind of mythologies kind of work together and are based off of one another, right? So in the beginning, there was the garden of the earth, and the earth was a paradise. And then what happened was there was a protoplanet, some type of planet. We don't really know exactly what it was, but it came along and it basically took the top off of our planet. And the top of our planet kind of orbited around, and eventually it made the moon, and that's why we have the moon. But what happened is this asteroid or protoplanet basically tilted us to the side, and we know this now through science, and it tilted us to the side. So now we actually have the seasons. We have the four seasons, because the way that the Earth is tilted. Okay. And so the legend, the mythos of Persephone and also the Garden of Eden, it's very similar. Just in the Garden of Eden, it was an apple and it was Eve. In the Greek mythology, it was Persephone and it was a pomegranate. So kind of, a similar thing going on here. But in the beginning, before there were even seasons, we have the goddess Demeter. And Demeter is the Greek goddess of wheat, of grain, and basically of agriculture. And it was basically Demeter's responsibility to go around and make sure that there was plenty of wheat all the time, and make sure that the people would be fed, and that there would be enough grain for the livestock and grain for the people of the cities and the villages and things like that. And so Earth was literally a paradise, and so there was the extreme poles, winters and the North and South Pole, and then but everywhere else was pretty much like a tropical kind of paradise. And Demeter had a beautiful daughter, and her name was Kore. And Kore was born of, she was half mortal, and she was also half goddess. So she was kind of like one of those, hero's journey stories like we have with Hercules and other half gods and half mortals that we have in our mythology, especially with Greek mythology. It was a really popular theme. But she had a daughter through a mortal, and so Demeter was the goddess of wheat and grain, and Kore, see, I'm going to make a mistake, and Kore was the goddess of fruit and flower and vegetation, okay? So Demeter was in charge of everything else, all the grain, wheat, barley, things like that, whereas Kore was really more in charge of the flowers, the fruits, the trees, and things like that. And as Kore grew up, she was perceived to be the most beautiful expression of like just pure innocence. And everybody agreed, gods and mortals alike, everybody agreed that she was the most beautiful. And everyone fell in love with Kore, gods and mortals. But the problem was with Aphrodite. Now, it's funny that Pamela's going to be going later on after me. She's going to be talking about Aphrodite. We didn't really plan it this way, but it's just kind of how it ended up. But yeah, so Pamela's going to be talking about Aphrodite later. But we all know Aphrodite, she's the good time gal goddess, right? And, it really wasn't so much that Aphrodite was jealous of Kore's beauty, because nobody can light a candle to Aphrodite. She's obviously the most beautiful. But Kore was the most innocent and virginal. So she was like the exact, and she was the exact opposite, the like antithesis of what Aphrodite was. And it's, not to shame Aphrodite, but Aphrodite was very insecure about that. As Aphrodite tends to be very insecure through the whole Greek mythos. And I'm sure Pamela's going to be talking a little bit about that today in part of her speech as well. And Aphrodite grew bored, and she grew very jealous of Kore's beauty and innocence. And she made a bet with her son. So Eros, also known as Cupid, many of us know Cupid from Valentine's Day. Aphrodite basically petitioned her son, made a bet with him that she could make even the most hideous and vile god of the underworld, Hades, fall in love with Kore as a sort of revenge. She was like thinking to herself, oh, you think you're that beautiful? Oh, you think you're that little Miss Goody Two-Shoes, huh? Well, let's see how you feel when I send Hades to you. The most vile, like, ugly, despicable, kind of guy, right? And so what happened was Eros, or Cupid, ended up shooting Hades with an arrow. And Hades was also the brother of Zeus, which was also Corey's uncle, which is kind of like a weird thing. A lot of the Greek myths are kind of like that. But soon after that, Hades began to covet Corey and wanted to have her for himself because he was this decrepit, he was used to dealing with death and the unsightly kind of parts of life and dealing with criminals and, things like that. And to him, I think in some way Hades probably felt that Corey could maybe balance him out or restore him or, bring life back into him or, show him more of the better side of life in the world. And so Hades basically went into a frenzy. He went mad with lust after Corey. And he conspired to kidnap her so that he could marry her and keep her for himself. It does sound like Snow White, doesn't it? They love that like Game of Thrones. Yes, it's very kind of like Game of Thrones, isn't it? It really is. So Corey's job was basically she would go around and she would whisper to all the plants and the seedlings, grow, grow, grow. And she would nurture them and bring them to life. So Corey was out in a field one day, a field of flowers, and she was tending to this field of flowers. And Hades came upon her and he had his staff, and he pushed his staff into the ground, and where his staff met the ground opened up a deep chasm. And so he grabbed Corey and they fled down this deep chasm into the underworld, and the ground came back and formed together, and you would never know that anything had happened. And Demeter was ready to begin, stopping for the day. It was growing to be the evening. She started looking for her daughter. And she went to the field to where Corey was supposed to be. And she wasn't there. And once she realized that her daughter was gone, she started going into her own type of madness. She was wondering where her daughter was. And she couldn't find her daughter. And she fell into a very, very deep depression. And so without Demeter to tend the grain and without Corey to breathe life into the vegetation, soon no food grew. And with that, the world fell into a very, very deep winter as both Demeter and Corey were absent from the world. And the people, all the villages and the cities were starving. And Zeus eventually started hearing their cries. They started petitioning to Zeus, Zeus, you need to help us. You need to help us. And so Zeus eventually, heard their cries for help. And Zeus went to Demeter and he basically started giving her anything she wanted, jewels and riches and statues of herself, all of these things that gods think that are important, these vanity type of things, And he even went so far as to make a wheat puppet of Corey to give to her to replace her daughter, And she refused them all, and she was not happy, and she said, I don't want these things. I want my daughter back. These things mean nothing to me without her. And so Zeus promised Demeter and the people that if Hades was really keeping Corey against her will, he would go down and get her. He would bring her back. He would say, no, Hades, you can't have her. But only if, it was 100% assured that Corey was not down there with her own free will and that she was down there because she was being held captive. So that sounds pretty fair, right? Jessica says, this part is always difficult for me to hear as a mother. I know. It really is. It really is. And I have another story towards the end of this I'm going to tell, which gives a little bit of a different perception of it. And so what happened is that, Corey had been down there for a while. And she was unhappy and she was depressed. And Hades heard wind of what Zeus was going to do, that Zeus was going to come, check up on them and see, and ask Corey if she was actually down there against her will or not. So Corey had been refusing food or drink. She had been not eating, and she was starting to wither away. She was half mortal, of course. So she was starting to wither away. And so Hades found the juiciest fruit that he could find, and he found a pomegranate, and he split the pomegranate in half, and he started eating half of it, and he gave her half of it. And he said, "Okay, I'll let you go. Just eat this fruit. I don't want you to be depressed. I don't want you to starve yourself. You have to eat something." So, as soon as Corey started eating the fruit, Zeus shows up. And he says, "Corey, are you here against your will?" By this time, she had already eaten 6 pomegranate seeds. And she says, "Yes, I want to go back up to my mother. I want to go back up to, the top world. I want to go back to being the goddess of vegetation. I don't want to be here. It's sad. It's depressing. There's nothing here. There's no life. I'm the goddess of breathing life, and here I am. I'm dealing with all these dead people, right?" And Hades says, "Ha ha! She has eaten 6 of the pomegranate seeds. So she has to be down here 6 months of the year. I will only let her go if she stays with me half of the year, and then she can go be with her mother the other half of the year." Because obviously, at Hades, at that point, Hades had grown. He's like, okay, she's not drinking, she's not eating, she's not she's not being the goddess that I need her to be. She's lost everything that I originally fell in love with her with. And to reconcile that quarrel, it was decided that Corey would live half the time in the underworld as Persephone, the goddess of the underworld, and then she would come back up to above, and she would be with her mother, and she would be Corey, and that was the fair, decision that Hades and Zeus and everybody could make. So everybody had to compromise. And this is where we get the myth of, we celebrate the awakening of Persephone in the springtime, the first new moon in, let's see, is it Aries? It's one of the new moons, but one of the new moons in the beginning of the year. And then we say goodbye to Persephone towards August, September, and the hunter's moon. And we say goodbye to Persephone. She goes back to the underworld, and we, receive the bounty of Demeter. So that's kind of where the Greek mythos kind of explains why we have 6 months of winter, and why all the food dies and all the crops die out in August, September, October, and then everything starts to come back alive in the beginning of spring. And so we have this, mythos of Persephone, as we have this story that's kind of depressing, yeah? Like, she didn't really win. Nobody really won, and she still has to be the goddess of the underworld, right? And so it's kind of a depressing story, yeah? And there's another story of Corey Persephone that I want to talk about too today. And it's not the most common story, but it's partly in Homer, I believe. Or it's either in Homer or Odysseus, I can't remember, but it's in one of those where there's a poem. And the poem kind of tells a little bit of a different story. And where I really started falling in love with Persephone. Like, before I could really relate to her in terms of, she gets kidnapped, and, she's the goddess of the underworld, and she's reluctant about accepting the dark side of herself. There's a reluctance there to it. And I think a lot of us can relate to that, especially those of us who are light workers, or, trying to raise our vibration and raise our vibration and frequency to where we're not dealing with these low vibe, like, feelings and these lower chakra type of these maybe traps that we kind of set ourselves in, like, abundance, like lack mindset versus abundance mindset, survival versus thriving, those sorts of things. And so let's backtrack a little bit, because there's a different story. So we know that Demeter is the goddess of the harvest, but she's also the goddess of, fertility. And by that, we aren't really talking about Demeter's obligation, are we? So if she is the goddess of grain and harvest and fertility, well, there is the opposite side of that, which is the goddess of also death, right? There is a cycle to life. Fertility, there is a cycle to it. So you can't necessarily be the goddess of life if you aren't also the goddess of death, or be able to, go between those two extremes, because that is the cycle of life. So the other story is that Demeter was obsessed with the cycle of life, and she neglected her duties over the cycle of death, right? So one day, while tending flowers and vegetation in a field, same field, with her daughter Corey had a thought, and she grew sad. And she asked her mother, "Mother, what happens to all of the souls that die without her mother there to greet them in the underworld? I know Hades is the god of the underworld, but really he deals mostly with murderers and criminals, and all these types of people. So what happens to just the good people that die, And if her mother is not down there to greet them and take them through the sacred funerary rites, all of these souls are kind of lost in the abyss, and there's really no peace. There's no way for them to move on, And so Demeter, basically, she shrugged it off, and she claimed that life was more important to tend to than tending to death. And that is true. It's true in a way. But Corey was upset by this, and she didn't feel that was right. It didn't sit well with her. She didn't understand how her mother could be so obsessed with tending life, but be not able to face tending the other part of the cycle of life, which is, death. And Corey told her mother that if her mother couldn't do it, Corey felt an obligation. She felt an obligation to go to the underworld and to take the good people through their funerary rites, the sacred death rites, and she would do this by marrying Hades. And she felt that with Hades there in the underworld to take care of the murderers and the criminals, the thieves, and with her there to greet the good people, they could restore balance, and that that would be the ultimate expression of their duties. So in this story, Corey told her mother this, and Demeter was not happy about this whatsoever. She said, "No, you cannot go. You have to stay here, and you have to tend to the flowers." And in this story, Corey ran away. She ran away from Demeter, and she ran away from her responsibilities, for tending life. She was like, "No, this is wrong, this is wrong. And I need to be able to tend to these people." And so it was Corey in this story that rebelled against her mother and chose to eat of the pomegranate fruit, so that Zeus would rule that she would spend 6 months in Hades and 6 months above ground with her mother. And that is quite a different story, isn't it? It's a little bit of a different story. Let me know. Tell me, how are you feeling about this story versus the other story? Yeah. Jen says that's one of my favorite parts of her as well. Yeah. Yeah. Angela says, I love this story so much more. Yeah. It's about culpability, isn't it? It's about culpability. And, there's this phenomenon, especially with light workers, that is called spiritual bypassing. We always try to cover up the not so glamorous parts of life, or the not so wonderful feelings that we have, by focusing on only the good things. And so what happens is that there's so much that builds up and isn't dealt with, and it becomes almost toxic, right? People can't move on. So it's a story of, in my opinion, the way I want to present this to you today, it's a story of that we can't neglect the negative or the unglamorous parts of ourselves, or our responsibilities as our own goddesses and gods. And if we do, we're not fully living. We're not fully in tune with the cycle of life. We're not in tune also with the other part of it, the cycle of death. And I think it's just one big allegory for taking responsibility for the things that are not so pleasant, the things that we wish that we could just shove down and forget, or gloss over with affirmations, and gloss over with, meditations and things like that. And I love this story so much more about Persephone and that it was her choice because I think that it's more empowering that way. And I think that it's time that we start rewriting Persephone's story as not someone who was kidnapped and forced into this, but someone who saw a void, who saw a need, and stepped up to be the person to fulfill that need, understood that it was part of her responsibilities as the goddess. Elizabeth, that's really beautiful. I need to find this version of the story. I've never heard it or seen it before. Yeah. Paula says, sounds more like a hormonal teenager. And that's true. And that, I think that's also relatable. So, how many of us have rebelled against our mothers? How many of us have seen where our mothers aren't really being adults in a situation and where we see our mothers are being insecure or immature about something? Or just simply looking back at past generations and seeing that they are neglecting or just glossing over a problem in the world, and the new generation saying, no, that's not right, we need to do something, we need to fix this. So how many of you can actually relate to that part of the story as well? Jennifer says this is a better story. Yeah. Jen says it makes her not seem like this brainless person who just listened to her mom all the time. Yeah, exactly. And it makes her also seem in the other story not like just some, child that just was kidnapped who couldn't like be aware of their surroundings, and things like that. It empowers her. It takes her power back. Yeah, Marissa says less of a victim, voluntary going to the underworld. Yeah. Yeah. Mario says essence of transforming perception and creativity and seeing the gift. Absolutely. Susie says I've always seen it as her choice. Yeah. And the way things really work. Mm-hmm. Pamela says it was also an act of selfless service. Right. Often we are called to be of service, and that is important to remember that sometimes that may not involve doing so delightful things. Absolutely. Jessica says, I love this. Susie says, I call her in when I do any mother-daughter wound healing on my clients in circles. Yeah, Persephone, if you have a mother wound, Persephone is a really great goddess to work with that. Right. Mario says could have been the kid app version was the perception of a victim. Right. And this other story about having found empowerment. Angela says, I think I'm still rebelling. I think we're all still rebelling. Elizabeth, finding that the balance is really important. We can't always pretend things are light and love. And I love that she isn't a victim in this version. She has power and a choice. Yeah. Jen says, that's a whole other workshop, the mother thing. Right. Mario says, I see the two stories as two parts. And that's interesting too. I agree with you because I think that somewhere in the middle of these two stories is the truth, right? That's always how it is. Truth is made up of multiple stories, multiple versions of people's truth, the truth anyway. So I really align with this second telling of Persephone and somewhere in the middle, there's somewhere in the middle that, is probably the most true. And like I said, when I was working on my Wiccan ministry through the Wolstenstein Theological Center, I went through this whole, thing with them. And it was in our first year that we actually did this. And we went through the initiation rites of Persephone. And it was all about us, basically we walked through this cloth. We walked through the veil. And if you look on the High Priestess of the Tarot, it's basically Persephone. It's, Persephone there with the moon. She has the knowledge of both life and death, and she has the tapestry behind her with the pomegranates on it, and then she has the pillar, Boaz and Yakin, and it's the dark and the light. So, anytime you go to think about Persephone and you're reading tarot, it's going to be really difficult to not see that anymore. And so that can be a really great meaning for the High Priestess, moving forward in your own readings. And maybe you read her a little bit differently now. Maybe she has a little bit more of a context to her. And maybe, I don't know, maybe you find that your readings with the High Priestess become a little bit more, in depth, or a little bit, they give a little bit more to the priestess, which can also, most of the times come off as like cold or calculating or logic versus emotion. And kind of in a way, it's kind of both, isn't it? So that's interesting. So it's going to be interesting to see how your readings change when you start seeing Persephone as the High Priestess. But in my opinion, Persephone really teaches us the beauty of our dual nature, our light, but also our shadow and our darkness. And it's that darkness, that feral, untamed, rebellious part of ourselves, that's not something really to be hidden away. There are forces that be that would love for us to all be obedient little girls, and that's just not reality. It's just not reality. And when we embrace that part of ourselves, and we do so fearlessly, we learn through the myth of Persephone to be courageous, to explore like the depths of ourselves, right? And to see where it is that we are just glossing things over, or where we're shoving things down and maybe not dealing with them, and we don't want to be the repeat of our forefathers and previous generations. We don't want to ignore our problems, because ignoring problems doesn't mean they go away. But it's also, hope. I think in a lot of ways, Persephone inspires hope. That there's hope that even if we do go down to the deep, depths of our psyche and the deep depths of our dark side, that we can come back, and we can come back blossoming every spring. And it's not some place that we have to live for a long time, but it's some place that we can go to, and we can explore, and we can see for ourselves what it really means for ourselves. And we can also come back every spring, and we can come back beautiful and innocent and virginal and pure. And it's like this acknowledgement of, we can be the dark, but we can also be the light. And it's not an either or. It's not mutually exclusive. And that's, the reality. And I'm going to be talking more about that on Friday with Odin, about the left-hand path versus the right-hand path. And I'll be talking more in depth about this kind of stuff. But what I love most about Persephone is that she claims it all. She claims all of herself. And I think a lot of the times, so often, we kind of spiritually bypass ourselves, don't we? Right? Who does that? Who's guilty of doing that? I'm guilty of doing that. In the deck I'm creating, she is the High Priestess. Yeah, and to listen to our inner voices that's trying to lead us, especially when, everybody else is telling us, no, we can't do that. Or no, we shouldn't do that because it's not proper, or it's not whatever, insert word. Jessica says, I wonder if Demeter would be the Empress. Yeah, she would probably be the Empress. Yeah. And the dark is not so scary. Right, Angela? Right. And it doesn't have to be scary. And I think a lot of times, we spiritually bypass ourselves. We try to gloss over our wild. And we do this with love and light and affirmations. And what that really is this disassociation with magical and metaphysical tools and healing, quote unquote healing modalities. And that's to keep ourselves in check, right? In line and kind of comfortable, so that we don't see these other parts of ourselves or other parts of other people. And for me personally, I feel that the psycho-spiritual drama of Kore and Persephone is about integrating both the unconscious self with the conscious self to heal the ego and to make peace with it, right? Because I talk about the ego all the time on all of my trainings, and the ego is basically our guard. It's our protective measure. It's there to make sure that we don't burn ourselves on the kitchen stove, but it's also there to make sure that we don't hurt ourselves, because the ego's prime directive is just to avoid hurt, right? To avoid hurt and pain. That's the prime directive of the ego. And I think that when we work with Persephone, or when we work with integrating our unconscious self and our shadow side and our triggers and things like that with our conscious self, I believe that true holistic healing and acceptance and confidence, that, that type of self-acceptance and that type of confidence that just comes from within, that nothing nobody else ever does or says about you or to you can ever really shake you from that. It might hurt at the time, but you get over it. You bounce back. That healthy ability to bounce your energy back. I believe personally that that has a lot to do with the unconscious self and the conscious self having a direct communication, a direct dialogue. And so we use tools like tarot to, be able to do that, or oracle cards, whatever. I prefer using tarot for it because tarot is fairly balanced in its negative and its positive, isn't it? Tarot tells the story of, all of human experience. And so that's why I kind of prefer to use tarot when it comes to doing any type of shadow work or anything like that. Making space, having that sacred space where your unconscious self and your conscious self can have a dialogue, and you can explore some of these limiting beliefs that you have, or some of these things that you think you should do or that you have to do because why? Because someone else said, or some other authority said, or, things like that. And I really love using tarot to kind of explore the crevices, the deep chasms, kind of like, I think that's really symbolic of the chasm that, erupts when Hades shoves his staff into the ground and kidnaps Persephone. I really feel that that is an allegory for, shadow work and basically kidnapping your consciousness and going down into the void. And exploring, that part that is kind of denied or suppressed because it makes us uncomfortable or it makes us afraid. There's many reasons why people kind of avoid certain things about themselves. Basically, your shadow is whatever doesn't fit your image, your ideal self, or like what you think your values, your morals, your ethics, and things like that should be being the key word. That becomes a shadow when who you truly are innately, who you truly are, and what some outside authority is telling you that you should be, it becomes a shadow, doesn't it? It becomes a conflict. And so what do we do with conflict? We disassociate ourselves from it. And I think Carl Jung said it best: would you rather be good or would you rather be whole? So think about that for a minute. What do you guys think about that quote? What do you think it means? Would you rather be good or would you rather be whole? Hey, Tanya, good to see you. Hi, Lynn. She says, yes, that's right. Marissa says, I have to be careful of that. It can be sneaky. It really can be. And it's a continual process. Hey, Nicole, good to see you. Jessica says, yes, looking at our shadows and bringing the light to them allows healing to take place. Yeah. Marissa says, love tarot and dream shadow work. Yes, 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 yes. So I'm going to tell you what I think choosing to be whole rather than being good, aka obedient, means. I think that a lot of us fear losing our light by embracing our darkness. We think that it's going to, take control over us, right? We feel like we're going to become a bad person if we acknowledge those things, or we'll be tempted into the dark side, as they say. And it's almost kind of like we feel like we have to choose. We have to choose as if we can't be both at the same time, right? Is that we can't be both expressions of who we are, our dark, wild, feral self, rebellious self, and the, ideal, good, obedient, fits in with everybody, type of self. And I have a question. So I want you to think about this. What if embracing our darkness actually led us to be more compassionate, understanding, and empathetic human beings, not only to just ourselves, but to others? Because how can we show profound compassion and understanding to others if we can't show that to ourselves, right? And so, in my opinion, wouldn't that really be the definition of light and love? Is, not just focusing on the light and love part, but understanding also the darkness within everybody, and understanding the shadows and how that plays out in somewhat toxic ways, and, just generally having more understanding and compassion for people. What do you guys think about that? Jessica says in some version, Hecate appears to look for Persephone and uses her torch to illuminate the dark. That's, ooh, I just got chills from that. So yeah, I think this is symbolic of facing our fears, Jessica says. Yeah, for sure. That's great. Thank you for sharing that. Tanya says, I'd rather be whole and feel secure in all. Yeah, right. Angela says, I have lived my life to be good. Now I just want to be whole. Absolutely. Hi, Ibu. Good to see you. Elizabeth says, wow, that's so true. I think we have to face that we are imperfect by nature. And, we are, because the systems that be have designed us from that. We have too many systems and too many powers that be, we have so much stuff crap that we're born into anymore that it's impossible to be born as innocent as Corey was. We're all imperfect. We are imperfect by nature, and we are afraid of being rejected by others when we fall short. Isn't that always it? Isn't that always it, Elizabeth? Is rejection, facing rejection, the desire to repress the self? It's so that we're not rejected by others, placing other people's opinions and judgments about us above our own. Isn't that the truth? Yeah. So it's more about saving face when we focus on only being good. Yeah, it's focusing on everybody else. Good is so subjective that it really depends on those around you. Being whole is more deeply tapping into us, where we are at, not being so worried about the perception of those around us. Absolutely. Hi, Freya. Jen says, absolutely, that's how I read and practice in life. Jen says, I also feel Persephone helped Hades accept his dark side. And that's, I don't want to perpetuate any stereotype of good women are supposed to make bad boys better, and that is a repeating theme that women have. That is a shadow that women have. But I also, speaking about the divine union and the twin flame union, opposites attract and things like that, I do feel that in some way, shape, or form, that Persephone ends up being the balance to Hades, for sure. She ends up, kind of tempering him out, because after that, he is not so grumpy anymore. If you read the mythos, things like that, he's not such a grump, anymore. And so, yeah, and more, scaling back out of that as well, it could also talk about the balancing effect of the sacred masculine and the divine feminine, and the positive and the negative that kind of go along with both of those. For sure. That would be such an interesting workshop, Jen. So, maybe you should do that. I would love to hear more about that. But yeah, Abraham, how many of you follow Abraham with Esther Hicks? Abraham is the collective entity that Esther Hicks channels. And Abraham says also that our shadows become our shadows, the darkness that we feel or that we see, is simply contrast, right? And it's contrast so that we can experience love and acceptance, right? Because without the darkness, without the shadow, love and acceptance are just meaningless, right? If everybody has love and acceptance all the time, it's not so important anymore, is it? It doesn't really mean anything. And so until we start, really seeing darkness as the contrast that we need to be able to interpret the light, then until then we're just really good projectors, aren't we? Because we're just trying to project light out, and not just projector as in like a physical device that projects light, but I mean also projectors in the psychological meaning of projecting our insecurities onto other people and deciding that they're bad or good people based on our insecurities, right? So it's, you have those two forms of that meaning, but we're really good projectors until then we project our ideals out into the world, and those ideals aren't always mirrored back to us, and that kind of leads to pain and suffering, right? And it leads us to have kind of like this lack of faith in ourselves, and when we don't get that mirroring back. And where I want to leave you guys off today, and this is the secret question, by the way. So if you want to be entered to win one of the workshops, so if you are in the Make Your Business Mentorship Program, you have all of these workshops. So you don't need to enter. You have them all. You can go view them in the group in the unit section, or you can get to them in the members only area on the back end of my website. So this is my question to you. What if we could be like Persephone? What if we could find balance between our lightness and our darkness? And what if we can actually find empowerment there? What if that could actually lead us to unconditional self-acceptance? And so the question is, how would the world be a better place if we could accept both our dark and our light and heal from having that communication, heal from having that dialogue, to where we're not just projecting these things then onto other people and perpetuating pain and suffering. So how would the world be a better place if we could accept ourselves where we are at with our darkness, and then use that contrast to actually project more lightness out into the world? So that is my question for you. So I'm going to be looking for answers by the end of Friday. Now, I do have a free gift for everybody. Let me pull it up because I want to share this with you. And what I have for you is a tarot and oracle spread. All right. Let me go full view. Okay, so this is the spread that I have for you, and it's called Persephone's Pomegranate. And it is a tarot and oracle spread to help empower you to embrace your darkness so that you can heal your shadows. So I have a little pomegranate on the bottom, and I love that. And the first card is, when you do this, you're gonna shuffle your deck. I prefer you to use tarot, or if you have an oracle deck that has both positive and negative kind of situations to them, then use that. But the very first card is the nature of the shadow. So the very first card you pull, where you're going to be looking into, okay, what is the nature of the shadow? What shadow are we actually dealing with here? So that'll be the very first card position. The second card position is going to be your relationship to this shadow. How is this shadow affecting you? Are you willing to accept this shadow? Are you not willing to accept this shadow? Have you been repressing it? That sort of thing. And then the third card position is why you have been repressing this shadow. So the first card says the nature of the shadow, what shadow you're dealing with. So this is great if you wanted to, just see what kind of shadow is there that you could pull and just go basically wild card with it. Or you could actually look inside your tarot deck and you could pull out a significator card and you can place that down if you wanted to do work around that. And the fourth position is the benefit from healing the shadow. So what do you have to gain? How will your life be different if you end up working on healing the shadow? Number 5 is the actual work that needs to be done to heal the shadow. So it's basically, okay, so you want to heal the shadow? This is what you need to do. This is how you do it. This is the action. And then finally, the 6th card is how you will be changed for the better once you actually heal the shadow. So let me grab the link. I'm going to give that to you now. And you don't have to sign up for anything. You can just download this just straight. Just download it straight to your hard drive. Yeah, Jen says, I also feel we have both Hades and Persephone's inside of us. Absolutely. You are welcome. Elizabeth says, I love this spread. Jessica says, this is perfect for shadow work clients as well as light work. Yeah, feel free to use it on your clients. This is for you. This is my gift to you to thank you for coming today. And like I said, if you want to be entered to win one of my workshops, I will be giving away 3 on Friday from this speech. And basically the question is, how will the world be a better place if we started embracing our darkness and our light? Okay. So any comments, any questions? If you wouldn't mind, put in the comments box below what you got out of this workshop. What was the thing that really stuck with you the most? I'm really curious. And if you have any questions about Persephone or about the story of Persephone or about how to use this spread, let me know. Victoria says, you look great. I will watch on the replay. Thank you. Susie says, awesome presentation as always. Thank you so much. Thank you. I appreciate you guys. Now, Pamela is going to be going later this afternoon, and she is going to be talking about Aphrodite. So Aphrodite was a big theme of the story of Persephone, so it would be great to follow up with that, you know. You post your, Angela says, where do we post our answers? You're just going to post your answers just right in the comment box in this live stream. And then what I'm going to do on Friday is I'm going to hit newest comments, and then I'm going to read through the newest comments. You're welcome, Freya. You're welcome, Tanya. I cannot wait to use this spread. Yeah, so let me know how it goes. And if you want to post your, if you're feeling brave and courageous enough, and if you want to post your spread along with your cards and your meanings, and if you want any additional insights, go ahead and post it to the group. We would love to kind of help you look at this. All right. Okay, guys, I hope you have fun with Pamela later on, and I will see you guys on Friday for Odin, and we're going to be talking about the god of war, divination, and magic. Not to be missed. Going to be a really, really great one. Marissa says, looking forward to this spread. I'll see you later. Great class. All right, guys. Bye.